Welcome to our ninth season of EdTalks and our fourth event of the 2020-21 season. My name is Adia Morris, and I'm so excited to be the MC for tonight's event. I use she, her pronouns. We are coming to you virtually from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I am, St. Paul, Minnesota, or Minnesota Makoche. This is the homeland of the Dakota people. It's important for us to recognize that unless we're Indigenous Dakota, we're on stolen land, taken through an unauthorized and illegitimate treaty in 1805. We recognize the acts of genocide committed against Native people, and perhaps most importantly, we acknowledge that Indigenous people are still here and present all around us. As we consume the important information presented in the talks this evening, I ask that you keep the troubled history of our state in your hearts and minds. I'm truly excited to welcome these two speakers to the virtual EdTalk stage and looking forward to their perspectives on addressing race and culture both in and outside of the classroom. But before we begin, a few housekeeping items. I want to take a moment to thank our generous sponsor, the Bush Foundation. Bush Foundation has supported this program for many years, and we continue to be so grateful for their partnership. We've pre-recorded both talks for this event tonight to ensure that our technology works smoothly. However, our presenters are also online live with us to participate in a Q&A at the end of the program. And speaking of which, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A at any time throughout the presentation, but keep in mind that questions won't be addressed until the end. Our event is scheduled to end at 8 p.m., but our speakers are willing to hang on a bit longer if you need more time to get to more questions. We also encourage you to engage with social media during and after the event. So please use the hashtag EdTalksMinnesota. That's capital E, capital D, capital T, ALKS, capital M, capital N. This event is being recorded for our EdTalks video and audio libraries, which you find by visiting the EdTalks webpage at achieveminneapolis.org/EdTalks. Let's get started. I am so excited to introduce our first presenter of the evening, Dr. Courtney Bell-Duncan. Courtney is a passionate educator, education consultant, and founder of Courtney S. Bell Consulting, LLC. While serving as a classroom teacher, she witnessed the power of caring relationships and high expectations for children. She later went on to become an educational leader and consultant with the goal of spreading her love of education more broadly. A proud graduate of North High Community High School, Courtney attended the University of Minnesota, where she completed her BA in sociology, her MED in curriculum and instruction, and PhD in education policy and leadership. In 2018, she was a finalist for the 2018 Minnesota Teacher of the Year Award. Welcome, Courtney. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you, Adia. Imagine a world where pre-K through 12 scholars are fully immersed in teaching and learning because who they are, what they know, and what matters to them is truly engaged as a standard of practice. Imagine a world where scholars understand their role in education to be facilitators, partners, knowledge bearers, and curriculum designers. A world where teachers and students have interchangeable identities and are partners in all things pertaining to curriculum and instruction. A world where those previously known as passive learners are esteemed as scholars charged with creation and distribution of knowledge. A world where cultural responsiveness is a way of being and regarded as best practice. For many, this world of education that I'm defining is but a fantasy, but I know this type of education to be a reality. I have personally experienced and witnessed the beautiful manifestations of culturally responsive pedagogy as a high school social studies teacher, and I want to share what I know with you. You see, it was a gloomy April day in 2018 when Chris walked into my advising office at the U of M and brought the son with him. Prior to Chris arriving, I had received a call from the front desk letting me know that a student insisted on meeting with me, but that I didn't have to take the unscheduled meeting. I stepped out of my office and saw a familiar and smiling face that I would never turn away. So I immediately waved him down and said, "Come on in, have a seat." Before sitting down, he said to me in excitement, "Miss Bell, I have to talk to you about something, and it's really important." So I stared at him, letting him know that he had my undivided attention. What he told me next would change the way I viewed culturally responsive teaching forever. Chris went on to tell me that he had thought long and hard about his proposed major in business and that he had changed his mind and wanted to become a social studies teacher. He told me that he wanted to give back to our home community of North Minneapolis as an educator, just as I had. He told me that he had watched me carefully since his freshman year and that I had exceeded all of his negative perceptions of teachers in the teaching profession. He told me that in my classes, he developed a love for social studies, specifically history and sociology, and that he planned to declare a major in history and a minor in global studies. Needless to say, I was speechless. I mean, absolutely silent. My words failed me, but my heart was filled with pure joy at what he had shared with me. He went on to ask me to help him to begin the process of transferring to the College of Education and Human Development and to enroll in the Direct Track to Teaching pre-licensure program. I dropped everything I was doing and connected him to the director of Direct Track, and as of now, he is a thriving junior in the program with plans to enter directly into the adjoining MED teaching licensure program immediately after graduation. On that day, Chris had made the life-changing decision to follow in my footsteps and pursue a career as a high school social studies educator. Beyond pride in that moment, I was moved to tears because my time as an emancipatory educator, advisor, mentor, and advocate had come full circle. You see, I first met Chris when he was a 14-year-old freshman in my first hour human geography / African American history course. We shared our first year at North High together, learned together, and grew up together as teacher and scholar. Chris watched me grow from a struggling first-year teacher who was frequently late to work to a 2018 Minnesota Teacher of the Year finalist during our fourth and final year at North High. Best of all, I got the opportunity to teach Chris again during his senior year when he enrolled in my elective sociology course. I watched him grow from a sweet yet sarcastic freshman into an empathetic, socially conscious young man who was deeply concerned with the human condition and the social world. Chris modeled his strong grip on social problems and solutions when I challenged him and his classmates to research and apply either the symbolic interactionist, functionalist, or conflict perspectives of sociology to their lives and to teach their classmates about the theories from their own perspective. Chris chose to focus on the symbolic interactionist theory and what means the most to him and why. He also used the symbolic interaction theory to explain how he had come to understand himself and the world around him. Chris and his classmates taught each other about the foundational theories of sociology through the application of the theories to their lives and their personal worldviews. This was made possible first by scaffolding the introductory information of sociology and then asking each of them to analyze, evaluate, create, and teach about the content through the lens of their own cultural experiences. I moved out of the way and allowed Chris and his peers to lead and learn from one another. And to be honest, it was the most rewarding gift to watch what they did with the stage. Chris attributed his love for and success in my social studies courses to co-creating the curriculum, facilitating thought-provoking conversations with his peers, and co-teaching from his own worldview alongside me. Yes, you're hearing me correctly. Chris and I started as a first-year teacher and a first-year student at North High School in 2014, graduated and retired together in 2018, and met again as professor and student in a first-year experience course at the U of M in the fall of 2018. Trust me, if I didn't live it, I wouldn't believe it. To have had the opportunity to not only teach Chris as a high school freshman, senior, and college freshman was absolutely breathtaking. To hear him describe how our genuine relationship and my authenticity as a culturally responsive educator influenced his decision to pursue a career in teaching honestly changed my life. It was in that moment that I recognized the emancipatory power of culturally responsive pedagogy. I watched Chris rise above epistemological injustice over a 4-year period and was blessed enough to see him run freely toward a career in a field that I hold dear. According to Miranda Ficker, epistemological injustice or oppression refers to those forms of unfair treatment that relate to issues of knowledge, understanding, and communication structures. These include a wide range of topics concerning wrongful treatment and unjust structures of meaning-making and knowledge-producing practices, such as exclusion and silencing, invisibility, inaudibility, distorted presence or representation, having one's meanings or contributions systemically distorted, misheard, or misrepresented. In classrooms across America, young scholars like Chris experience epistemic injustice or knowledge oppression on a daily basis. It shows up in the form of silenced student voices, lacking or misrepresented depictions of self in course textbooks, disacknowledgement of the cultural experiences and contributions of marginalized peoples, and through the complete erasure of multicultural histories and narratives in course curriculums. Many educators find themselves on the distributing end of epistemic injustice without a clue of how to change and revolutionize their practice. Many find themselves in search of a manual on cultural relevance and student engagement. But what if I told you that epistemic injustice is a social issue with deep emotional, educational, and moral implications? The late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other." I offer that epistemological injustice is the manifestation of the unknowingness and lack of communication that Dr. King spoke of in his Nobel Peace Prize speech. It is impossible to learn from or teach those who you do not know. Quite frankly, one cannot learn from or teach those who they hate, fear, or spend no time with. Many of you probably agree with me, but the question is, what will we do to start conversations, pass the mic, and share the stage with students in classrooms? The answer lies in 2 words: cultural responsiveness. For many, these 2 words trigger the paralysis of fear. Many ponder, how am I supposed to know and understand the cultural and lived experiences and preferences of each student that I teach? Answered simply, you can't. No matter how well-traveled one may be or how many international souvenirs one collects, it is impossible to be an expert on the cultural experiences of others. Feel free to take that weight off your shoulders. Now that we've established that cultural omniscience is not realistic, let's focus on what is possible. Every person, whether educator, scholar, parent, or administrator, has the ability to connect with others through communication. Don't believe me? Listen to this. If I were to inform you that I just became engaged to be married, what would be the first question you'd ask me? I'm thinking that you asked me, who popped the question or who's the lucky guy, right? Well, that's because in the case of marriage, it's understood that engagement takes 2. However, when engagement of students by teachers is discussed, scholars are expected to engage without the big question being asked of them. What's the big question, you ask? Well, there are several questions actually, with the main ones being, who are you? What matters to you? Where are you from? How does what we're learning connect to your lived experiences? How can we be partners in your education? When these sorts of questions are asked of scholars, authentic engagement is inevitable. Cultural responsiveness is spearheaded by asking genuine questions, listening intently, sharing openly, and responding accordingly. The culturally responsive educator sparks conversations with scholars by genuinely inquiring about who they are, what's important to them, what's important for them, and how this all connects to what they're learning. The mic is then passed to the scholar for their voice to be heard loud and clear and to be listened to. More important than the act of asking and listening is the response of educators to the vital information that has been shared with them. Making the call, starting the conversation, listening, sharing, and responding are the 5 key essentials of culturally responsive practice. Best of all, everyone has the ability to do these things. You learn from Chris's story the impact that culturally responsive pedagogy and a scholar-led classroom can have on the lives of learners. And its influence doesn't stop there. In a 2016 study conducted by Bird, 92% of the 315 6th through 12th grade students surveyed indicated that they were more engaged in learning when their teacher used real-life examples and tried to connect lessons to their interests and lived experiences. The numbers truly do speak for themselves, and so do the scholars in classrooms across the United States. I'm sure you probably think that this is the part of my talk where I give you a 10-point list on how to be a culturally responsive educator. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, but that will not be happening here today. Why not? Simply put, epistemic injustice and cultural destructiveness stem from the human heart and mind, and therefore must be corrected through thoughtful and heart-filled effort. Genuinely seeking to know, understand, learn from, and collaborate with scholars in their educational journeys takes effort of the heart and mind. I believe that if you shift the mind and heart, that the practice will surely follow. I believe that everyone has the capacity to be culturally responsive, and the only prerequisite is to acknowledge your humanity and the humanity of others. The war against epistemic injustice can be won, one battle at a time, by making cultural responsiveness a way of life. Start the conversation, pass the mic, and share the stage with scholars you serve. I promise you won't regret it.
Thank you so much, Courtney. I wish you could see me back here. You can't hear me, but I'm clapping every 5 minutes during your talk. Thank you so much. A quick reminder now to everyone to submit your questions to the Q&A as they come to you. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the program. Next, we'll hear from Derek Francis, who will speak to the critical importance of talking about race in school. Derek is a passionate and experienced school counselor who approaches his work from a proactive and equity-based space. He's the manager of counseling services for Minneapolis Public Schools, where he specializes in helping students and staff build trusting cross-cultural relationships. Derek has presented at several conferences throughout the country and recently led a webinar for over 20,000 US counselors and educators on proactive school counseling after a major racial incident. Derek's published work includes contributions to contemporary case studies in school counseling, a recent blog entitled "This is Not a Fire Drill: Supporting Students After George Floyd," and articles for the American School Counselors Association and American School Board Journal. Derek holds a master's degree in clinical social work from Augsburg University. Thank you so much for being here, Derek. Take it away.
Thanks, Adia. That's right, I'm Derek Francis, and I am the manager of counseling services for Minneapolis Public Schools. I've been a school counselor for 9 years, and one fun fact about me is that the first time I saw a school counselor that was African American, I was 26 years old. And so I'm a huge advocate for us making sure that we empower our students to know they can go into school counseling. During my time at North High School, I was part of an amazing team that helped transform North High School, increasing its graduation rates over 4 years. And you see some of the photos there. And then also my daughter's in the picture there. I love her. Her name's Grace, and she's a huge inspiration for why I do this work. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how to address racial incidents in your school. And so here are some key things for today's session. We're going to learn strategies to proactively address and reduce racism and discrimination in schools. We're also going to understand a little bit about race, privilege, and bias, and how it impacts our relationships with colleagues in the community. And last, we're going to learn some strategies so that you feel empowered, have a sense of direction of things that you can do to support your students and other colleagues when racial incidents happen in your building. And so I want to begin. I shared with you that I worked at North High in Minneapolis. I also then transitioned to Champlin Park High School after my time at North. And so Champlin Park is a school that I actually went to as a student. I played sports, I made connections with many students and teachers, and so now when I went there, I was on the other side. I was now working with teachers that I had. And now I was not the student, I was actually an educator. And so when I was there at Champlin Park as a student, I actually had seen acts of racism. And so when I was coming back as a staff, I had heard, even during my interview, I asked questions because I heard about racial incidents that were going on in the school. My second year at Champlin Park as a school counselor, there was a racial incident that could not be avoided. On the ride to a volleyball game, one of the white students on the team recorded herself singing a song, and in that song she's using racist language. Well, that recording makes social media. Students throughout the building hear and see the video. And we're talking about a very large school, 3,000 students. Many of the students felt hurt. They felt upset, unheard at the inconsistency of how events were being handled. And so the students responded. Take a look at this video.
Last Friday, we were shown that racism still exists within Champlin Park.
Snap, don't clap.
Racism is ignorance. Racism is not only about consequences, but about education and justice. Today we are here to present how many people were impacted by this issue. Don't lead only for the consequence of what might come out of it. That is not the only intention behind this. But use this opportunity to educate the ignorant. The people that don't know.
Yes.
The people that don't understand. This is our platform. Look how big of a platform we have. Look how much support we got within CP. Because we stand together. This is the rebel family right here.
And so, after seeing a video where students are sharing and responding, I think it's important for us to think about why, for a time like this, it's important to have these conversations. And so it's important because our country is becoming more diverse. Our schools, our communities have more people from different diverse backgrounds, which is beautiful, that's awesome. Also, though, we have to be aware that there's been an increase in racial incidents in our schools and in our communities. And so you see, right here in Minneapolis, Twin Cities, we watch as a community, we watched George Floyd murdered. And that hurt. That brought out so many conversations around race and trying to get a better understanding around racism and microaggressions and bias. Also, we saw conversation around race come up during politics and during the insurrection, around the attire that was being worn and the messaging from those that took part in the insurrection. And when these events happen, it impacts your school environment. Students are showing up repeating things that they saw on the news. They're repeating things that are heard at home. And it's really important for us to make sure that we're creating a safe environment where students come to learn and feel supported and valued. And also it's important to have these conversations because oftentimes staff don't feel prepared. They don't know what to say. They say, hey, I'm here, I'm a math teacher. I'm not sure what to say. I just want to teach my content. And that's often met with just silence. And our students feel that silence. This next part, I want you to take a look at this picture. As I shared with you about George Floyd and his murder, you gotta imagine now, let's make this real. Someone lost their only begotten son. We have students who live on this very block. Every day they walk by here, it's a reminder, the trauma. So this is just a picture for some of us, you see it here and there, but for those in the community, it's a daily reminder. Hearing helicopters, smelling the smoke during that time, all those triggers for students. the George Floyd events made people begin to really reflect on where they stand on issues of race. And so it's important that as we talk about race and racism in our country and in schools, that we look at the history of our country, because that has tremendously shaped how people view each other, how they view racism. And so we have to be aware of just the creation of racism in our country, how it separated people, understand the concept of slavery, and seeing people as less than, 3/5 of a human being. And then after that, then there's Jim Crow laws and segregation. And then thinking also now about how that impacts our communities, how they're set up. You see there in the map, Minneapolis and the redlining that happened. And that divides neighborhoods along racial lines. And so you gotta think also, schools being segregated throughout our country. And so think about the social climate. You have a time in our country's history where socially bringing students together in a school was met with so much resistance, massive resistance, where people are seen picketing and saying, we don't want students here of different races. We want to keep our schools white. There's a district in Virginia that decided, you know what, we would rather shut down the entire district than integrate. So it's important that you think about those social impacts of the community, how people are seeing each other as they're navigating the spaces together. So now let's take a look at this slide, because we talked about just getting an understanding of racism in our country and how we've gotten to this point now. And we gotta look now here in Minnesota, what that looks like in our schools. This past summer, many students throughout Minnesota shared about the racism they had experienced in schools. Students shared stories of words that were said to them in the hallways. They talked about the times where people brushed off or avoided the things that they shared with their teachers about what they had experienced. So many times when these things happen, staff don't feel prepared to have the conversation. They sometimes dismiss students when they're sharing real issues, real pains that they've experienced, real words they've heard. It's important for us to not dismiss how students are feeling. It's important for us to have this conversation and recognize that this is really happening right here in our own state. And so it's important to understand how racism shows up in our schools. 59% of hate incidents that occurred in schools were related to race or ethnicity. Also, these events are happening in all the common spaces in schools. So a lot of the incidents occur in the hallways, or in the bathrooms, even the classroom. And it happens in a variety of ways. So sometimes it could be on social media, it could be on art, it could be on bathroom stalls. It can also sometimes even be said verbally. So it's important for us to know that these things are happening in our schools. And how are we showing up and addressing it? So let's take a look at this list. And this is a short list of racial incidents in Minnesota over the past 4 years. Let's look at the different type of incidents. What things are being said, how those words may be landing on students, how they're hearing this on a daily basis. And this is just what's been reported or made social media or the news. Now, let's take a look at a video where fourth graders are sharing about some of the things they've heard in school.
The lie. Muslims are terrorists.
Black boys are bad.
Girls are not athletic.
Latinos can't speak English well.
Chechens are a bad influence on others.
Africans aren't smart.
Asians can't play sports.
All black people are thieves.
People from Mexico bring nothing good.
I'm too pretty to be Togolese.
The lie. All white people are racist. The truth. I'm white and I'm not racist. I care for people who are of another race.
I may have brown skin, but I'm the same as you. If you test me, I will succeed. And you underestimate me by the color of my skin, I'm tired of the hurtful words.
Latinos like me can speak English well. They are learning, doing their best. Have you learned a second language? It's hard, and yet people yell at Latinos because they don't understand what they are saying.
Why? Why do they say that? Why do they? What did I ever do to you to make you judge me and say that? You should know, not all Muslims are terrorists.
But you push me down just to pull yourself up. You use lies to make me feel like that's what I really am. Like I really am a thief.
but I know I'm not a thief because I still am, just like you.
So you shouldn't judge me or people like me. So why are you judging them? You don't know them. So stop the lies. Don't let the others brainwash you.
Those negative words are a noisy room full of rumors. I just want to cover my ears and just forget.
What is the truth? I know the truth that lies in my heart, the truth about black boys. I am black, this is me, the lie about black boys that I don't believe in, and I know it's not the truth, because the truth that is real is my truth.
Girls can definitely be athletic.
I am Asian. I play soccer.
I can be pretty and be Togolese. Beautiful people come from all over the world.
I am Latino, and I can speak English.
I'm not a thief. I've never stolen anything.
I'm not a terrorist, so think again.
I am black. I am not aggressive. I would not harm anyone.
Everybody deserves equal rights. Everybody deserves respect for who they are. Racist people don't believe these things. I'm not one. I am me.
So where do these lies come from? Because I've heard them before as an educator in school and even as a student. I remember in grad school when I would go into the dining hall or even just walking around on campus, people would walk up to me and say, hey, good game last night, or hey, you must be on the basketball team. And I'm just sitting there like, just because I'm a tall black dude doesn't mean I have to be on the basketball team. I'm here getting a master's. I think it's important to just be mindful that can I not look the way I look and wear a hat or a chain and be a school counselor? I don't always want to have to feel like my physical being has to be an athlete or some type of performer. I want to be an educator. I want students to see me and say, hey, that's what a school counselor looks like too. It's important for us to examine, do a reflection, an audit of ourselves and what things play a factor into how we do life with people who are different from us, people have different backgrounds. So it's important to think about what were the messaging you got growing up? What were some things that you were told about people that were from different backgrounds? What were the news outlets that you were watching and the messaging you were told? Maybe it was also places you went like church. What did your church look like? What were the communities you lived in? Were there a lot of people from different backgrounds, different races? Or was it predominantly people who looked the same? What were the written and unwritten rules about talking about race? Was it okay to talk about race, but not talk about someone who was gay or lesbian? What were some of the things that you all didn't talk about about certain neighborhoods? Did you say that neighborhood, hey, let's not go to that neighborhood, let's lock our doors there? Or what would you consider the good neighborhoods? So it's important for us to be aware of those biases that we have. And I have to be honest and vulnerable about biases that I had growing up, assumptions I made about people. And I remember my first year working as a school counselor, I had to work through biases I had around Asian American students. I had the bias of thinking that Asian American students were always going to do well and were like the smartest kids, always great at math. And you know what? Those assumptions got in the way of me supporting students who really did need academic support. And so I have to be honest and real and vulnerable about doing that audit, doing my own work. And I really encourage you all to do that work on your own too. So it's important for us to be honest and do an audit for ourselves. What could be your tough spot? Sometimes it could be race. Some people it could be someone's sexual orientation. Sometimes it could be politics, especially thinking about this previous election. What biases did you have towards people that voted differently for you? And now we got to make this personal because I have a daughter. Those of us with kids, our kids are watching us. They're listening and seeing what we're saying. They're hearing these things that people in the community are saying. I have a 19-month-old daughter, and she's already experienced racism from within her own family. And I know it can be hard to speak up because oftentimes no one wants to ruin dinner. So then people make excuses and say, you know what, well, they had good intention or they didn't mean it like that. But it's important for us to realize that the impact, the hurt of what we do really influences how someone feels, how connected we are to other people, and how our communities thrive. So we can't be neutral. We can no longer hear racism, see discrimination and bias, and hear microaggressions and not do anything. You can't be in between. It's not like an opinion thing. It's not like pizza toppings. You have to be really straightforward on doing this work. It's also important for us to highlight and understand that racism impacts students and children at a very young age. Racism is an adverse childhood experience. Racism carries so much negative experiences and feelings and emotions that oftentimes go unaddressed. There's even times where people get into college and they're experiencing these same feelings and traumas and isolations and feeling unheard when they want to share about racism they experienced either at school or in their community. Being pushed down so many times when they try to say, hey, this really did happen to me. It can become draining. And I've even experienced it as an employee. I remember when I was at Champlain Park. I loved being there. It was the school I went to. I graduated from. I knew the staff. But there was always that part of me that knew they don't fully understand what it's like being here and seeing the racism go on in our building and not seeing it handled appropriately or addressed in a way that's really reflecting our community and its values. It's hard and can be draining being one of the few educators of color in a building. So now what do we do? Now this is the exciting part where we know these issues are going on in our country. And us as educators, we have an awesome opportunity to show up for our students and create space to start having these really needed dialogues. We've addressed some of the issues in our schools around racism, and now I want to offer some strategies. It's important that we don't just sit and admire the problem. Let's take action. We have a part to play. Let's be proactive. And so starting off, it's important to have an actual plan for if racial incidents happen in your school. Don't wait for the events to happen and then scramble for things you can do. Think of it as how you prepare for a fire drill. Schools oftentimes plan for fire drills and prepare and do drills 3 times throughout the year. I've been working as a counselor for 9 years, and I maybe had 1 fire in a building. But I've had many racial incidents occur. So let's start planning, having actual strategies, having preventative measures in place to avoid these racial incidents. It may not be the same damage as a physical fire, but the emotion, the pain of emotional hurt from racial incidents need to be tended to. Next, it's important to examine your school's climate and culture. Have you had incidents occur in the past? What are things you're hearing and seeing in the community? What are things that are happening on social media? And then the other thing, I'll talk more about this coming up, how can you be proactive? How can we get ahead of it? How can we teach some strategies and lessons and skills for students to build cross-cultural relationships? It's important when having dialogue around race in your school that you take a multi-tiered approach. One way you can do that is through your school handbook. In Minneapolis Public Schools, we decided to create a lesson that went along with the school handbook when we're talking about racism and bias and different acts in school that are not appropriate and hurt. In Minneapolis Public Schools, we've made it a priority to talk about race and ethnicity and culture with students. We've been very intentional. One way we're doing that is through our social identity wheel. We had students talk about their different identities. We also asked them to talk about which identities are most important to them, which ones they don't feel that they have really shared or dove into as much, which identities that they don't think other people in school know about. And then we also asked students to share the identities that they had in common. We did that as an opportunity for students to build relationships. Right at the beginning, we addressed it. We talked about it. We wanted students to know this is a safe space to talk about your identity. At the elementary level, we're going to have all students read the book called The Color of Us. And in that book, we're going to talk to students about the different shades of skin tone that are represented in the classroom. But we're also going to help them know that each tone, each shade, it's beautiful. Your brown is beautiful. That shade that you are is awesome. That peachy skin is awesome. Helping them know and see you're awesome the way you are and empowering them. The other thing that we're making sure to do is talk to students when racial incidents occur. So finding space for them to know different terms around what protest means and what's an election or what does racism look like. And we're going to teach them strategies to be an ally. We want to make sure that children have the words to call out racism and discrimination in schools. So those are just some strategies that we plan to use in Minneapolis. I really hope that you're able to use some strategies in the school building that you're at to help create a more inclusive environment. Thanks so much for checking out today's session, and I hope that you're able to find some of these strategies helpful as you're supporting your building. Check out different events that are going on throughout your community, and also check out some of the professional development opportunities that I'll have coming up soon. Take care.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you, Dr. Bell, for such incredible insights tonight. Now, those of you who are watching, it's your chance to join the conversation with our EDTalks presenters through our Q&A. So you remember that button from the slide? It should be down there at the bottom of your screen if you have a question that you wanted to ask either Dr. Bell or Derek. Please feel free to type it into that button and we'll get to it shortly. And you can continue to ask questions throughout the Q&A. It's not a one-shot deal. You don't put one in and then it's over and you never get another opportunity again. Please do continue to ask questions throughout our Q&A. I'll start with a few that I had for Courtney and Derek. One of the first things that I'll ask Courtney is, are there any, well, let me back up. Why is it important to practice culturally responsive teaching and educating?
I think that it's important to practice cultural responsiveness in general, but more specifically in the classroom, because it really is the life of the learner that we're talking about here. And so if they're going to learn, it has to be relatable to who they are, and it has to be grounded in who they are and what matters to them. So ultimately, it has been said that if a person period is not engaged in their learning, then they're not learning at all. And we all know what that looks like, even as adults. If somebody gets to talking about something and you don't feel like it's relevant to your life, what's the first thing you do? Now, for us as adults, it looks a little different, right? Because we open up our laptops and then all of a sudden we look like we're professionally disengaged. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same thing. You know, it's been many a times I've had my laptop open and I've been shopping or looking for what I'm going to wear for an event, and I'm supposed to be engaged, but the person presenting didn't engage me. They didn't do the work to engage me. So therefore, I did my own thing. And that's what's happening in classrooms across the nation. And so it really is important, because if learning is truly as important as the system says it is, then engagement is required for that learning to take place.
Right. Thank you. Derek, did you want to add anything? I know that identity came up in your discussions about talking about race. I heard similar things in both of your talks.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, first of all, I met Courtney as Courtney, and we were colleagues together at North, and I would come into her classroom and just mess with her and all the students in there, see who had snacks. And it's so awesome to see her now, Dr. Bell-Duncan. Just saying her name feels good. And so the funny thing is, even I would walk by her classrooms and I would be hooked by the things on the wall, because it would reflect a history about myself and want me to go do exploration too. Or I'd go in her classroom and just listen and hear what they're talking about. Or have students coming to me to say, hey, guess what Ms. Bell's doing in class today? Guess what we talked about today? And so it feeds something in them where they're excited to learn. And not only that, I was an adult saying, I never heard this before either. And so all the work that I'm doing now And that experience at North and being around educators like Dr. Bell-Duncan to know, hey, I can actually learn more about myself, my identity. And you find it's a natural interest when it's about you, and you see people who look like you or tell a story or been through struggles that you're probably currently going through. And so that's what makes learning authentic then. And so I really hope that we can help spur that in youth. And that's what Dr. Bell-Duncan's doing right now. And I love seeing her do that work.
Thank you, Francis. And I just want to go ahead and shout out Francis as well. Cultural responsiveness, as I said, is a way of life. And Francis practiced at North culturally responsive counseling. So young people felt like they could literally dream up whatever it is that they wanted to be and do because they had a counselor that looked like them who was genuinely invested in their future. And that's important because we all know that if a counselor is not culturally responsive, they can do a lot of damage. And so Francis, just shouting you out to say that you have done amazing work, and I really enjoyed working with you at North.
Thank you.
Go Polars.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, we've had some questions pop up in the Q&A, so I'm going to jump into these.
All right.
Scroll through. Oh, there's a few. Good. I work in a department where success is conventionally defined by how polished student products appear. I work to center culturally responsive teaching in my classroom, encouraging students' choice and voice to co-create curriculum and lessons that are relevant to their lives and identities. Some colleagues voice the concern that if I stop using the traditional approach and allow students to co-lead, then the quality of student products will suffer and reflect poorly on our department and the district. How do you navigate tradition versus progress when you are in the minority of advocating for change?
So the first thing I'm going to say is go afraid. Go afraid and go uncomfortable, because you're going to be uncomfortable. You will be questioned. You won't be liked, but at least amongst your peers, but you will be respected by your scholars. And that's really, truly what matters, because as an educator, you have a lot of autonomy. When you close that door, it's you and your scholars. And it is your duty to teach them in a way where they are going to love what they're learning and see themselves in what they're learning. That is your number one job. If you are not doing that as an educator, you are malpracticing. And ultimately, if your peers are promoting that malpractice, then really, ultimately, are they really your comrades? Probably not. And so at the end of the day, their opinions really don't matter. And you have to be okay with not being invited to the happy hours and, the staff outings. You got to be okay with that. But really, at the end of the day, again, there's far too much malpractice going on in K-12 institutions. If you are in the minority, then you are on the right side of justice. And that is okay. And you should find peace and pride in that.
Excellent. I'll throw this one to Derek first, but I would love it if both of you would weigh in. Have you seen opportunities for parents to make a positive impact on the racial reconciliation work you're both doing in schools? What could those opportunities or examples look like?
Yes. Oh man, I've seen it work well and I say well as it could, where I've supported some schools and communities throughout the Midwest after racial incidents. And we do a parent night, a family night, where families come in and we talk about race and just give an overview of just racism, how those patterns have been built. And in those, we talk about just in their community, talking about where do you see these things happening? Where do you experience it? But that not only that, having that time to listen, where families, parents are listening to how their kids are influenced by racism in the community, what things they might be overhearing at dinner. And so helping them to realize, okay, I can't just say I don't want our kids to have these racist things they're saying and doing. I have to model it too, because that's really a huge piece of it. So we talk about that and help them find ways to build cross-cultural relationships, whether it's at the sporting event. What families and parents are you sitting by? What parents are you not sitting by? Who are you inviting over to the house? You can't say you want your kids to have a diverse friendship group if your friendship group isn't diverse in itself. So those are some of the conversations we have, and I think it's from a place of wanting to build bridges, connect with people, because it can be hard to hear some of these things as parents. But I think it's important for them to realize it impacts their kids, and it can make for a better school community.
Mm-hmm. Courtney, did you want? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Adia, can you repeat the question for me?
Yep.
Please.
Let me read it again. Have you seen opportunities for parents to make a positive impact on the racial reconciliation work you're both doing in schools? What could those opportunities or examples look like?
Absolutely. And I believe that it looks like, first of all, the understanding that parents are the first educator in their child's life. They are the first educator, and therefore they are the most prominent partner in their child's education. And I think that it requires thorough stakeholder engagement and bringing parents in to the work, bringing them in as educators and saying, this is what I'm trying to do. How would you like to help? And how can you see yourself engaged in this process? Because most times if you ask that question, they will tell you, oh, this is how, these are the times where I'm most available. This is what I can contribute. But if you ask, I would say there's not a parent that doesn't want to positively impact their child's educational outcomes, but not just education, their child's social understanding of who they are and how they navigate this world. And so I really just feel like it's, again, starting the conversation, sharing the mic, and really just sharing the stage with parents, just as you do with the scholars, to really have them engaged as partners in their child's education.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. A question for both of you along the same lines. What does or should engagement look like in distance learning now that we're in this environment where we're not all sharing the same space all the time? Either of you can start.
What does this work look like in distance learning?
Yeah, what does this kind of engagement look like in distance learning?
Yeah, I'll share from just awareness perspective around what engagement should look like, because although we're navigating the pandemic all together, the same storm, we're riding in different ships. Some folks have so much privilege and they're at home chilling in the comforts of their living room, multiple devices, fast internet. And so, and even in pods where they're connecting with other families and we have students and families who they've been hit by the pandemic so hard, where there's been so many people in their family that may have been in the hospital by themselves. And so we have to be aware of what students are navigating differently based on their situations. And I think understand that as an educator, your students who are not as privileged with resources, this has been a struggle. It's ongoing. They're stressed out. The pandemic's wiped out family members. It's taken jobs away. So understanding your approach. If your student doesn't have their camera up, you know what? Just be glad they're there. Mm. You know? Also just understand how to check in with how they're doing. If you haven't heard or seen them come up on the screen in a week, don't ask them where they've been. Mm-hmm. Don't ask them to turn on their screen. Say, hey, how you doing? How things going? How you feeling? How's the family doing? Especially for people of color, that how's your family doing question, that's a whole nother level of, okay, you want to know how I'm doing. How the family doing? That's what you need to be asking. I don't care if you're passing right now. How are you doing? So that's the kind of work that we need to do when we're engaging in distance learning, is to see because now we can educate in a different way. We can start educating for them. How can you manage taking care of yourself emotionally each day? How can you navigate the trauma? Hey, even if it's just a conversation, let's check in. Hey, you want to watch, what movie you watching? Let's talk about it. You watching the game last night? Oh, you see Tyler Johnson play? Yeah, hey, let's talk about that. Did you see the game? Then they're gonna come and say, hey, I want to talk to you. Hey, yeah, I saw the game. Oh, I saw you wore your jersey. That's that, and for me as a school counselor, that's the kind of stuff I love to do. And so that's what we need to do. Connect with them at a human level. How are you doing? Okay, now that we've made that agreement, we can check in. I know what's going on in your life. Now, all right, let's engage. What do you need? So that's how I do the work. You got to remember, we're in trauma. So it has to be a trauma-informed response right now. Not about the structure of academia. We got to know, how are people feeling? What are you going? And let's be honest, all of us are going through something right now. Let me tell you, I am too. Oh my goodness. So if we all know we going through stuff, imagine the kids, and we haven't had that physical connection of touches or hugs, and that impacts our emotions. I'll stop there because that's the real conversations we got to have with kids if we want engagement.
Yeah, I agree completely with Derek. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it starts with the humanistic aspects of conversation. How are you doing? What's going on in your world? What matters to you right now? What's the most pressing thing that's on your mind? If you have that relationship, and if you don't, that's how you build them. It's really just inviting the scholars to have conversations based around who they are, and then you as the educator being creative to say, how do I insert my content into that? How do I take this social studies lesson, or this US history lesson, or this sociology lesson, or this algebra lesson, and connect it to what they are giving me? Because cultural responsiveness is a conversation. It's call and response. I'm going to make the call. I'm going to ask the questions, and then I'm going to listen. And then when you respond, I then will respond accordingly. And it just goes, it's an iterative process. It just continues. And so really, whatever it is because educators are amazing people. The mind of an educator is so flexible in so many different ways. Like, me being in the classroom, the things that I've learned apply so broadly to everything that I do in life. And so those abilities translate. Really, teachers are built for tough. Understand? They're built for tough. So it's really the pandemic and distance learning. Even though it's something new, educators are riding the wave every day. But the one thing that's not new is the importance of conversation, the importance of connecting with people, the importance of saying, what about this topic connects to your life? What about this topic is relevant to you? And then take it from there. I love what's going on with distance learning. You know why? Because it's revamping the way people think about education. And it's very scholar-centered, and it is promoting a lot of independent work time, and it is requiring educators to let go of the reins because we have no choice. And in that, there's beauty that has sprouted. It really just depends on your mindset as an educator and the recognition that when you let go, scholars do amazing things that will blow your mind. But they have to have the stage in order to perform.
Both of you, I don't know, maybe it's the moon, maybe it's that you just have powerful words. Derek, I can see why you're an amazing counselor, because I felt myself like that touched my heart, when you're talking about actually checking in with somebody. Amazing. And Courtney, I'm just over here like, yes, and everybody else is agreeing with me down in the chat. So thank you both. Just a human moment there for myself. I really got, I'm starting to get a little teary too. Let's go to a question that's, actually, I read an article about this, about a school in Texas. An NFL player moved. Do you know this story, Derek? An NFL player moved there with his family. I currently work in a school that is predominantly white, and some of the parent population is expressly uninviting of conversations about race and diversity. What suggestions do you have for educators who want to make space for these important conversations despite ruffling feathers?
Yeah, ruffling feathers, huh?
love ruffling feathers. I love it. I love it. I love all kinds of feathers. I love flamingo feathers. I love eagle feathers. Whatever kind of feather I can if I'm ruffling feathers, then that means I'm doing my job. That means I'm doing my job. Because at the end of the day, if you're comfortable and it's quiet and you feel like I'm in agreement with inequality, something ain't right. Because silence and neutrality is not neutral whatsoever. So again, I just got done saying this today. You have to make a choice. When you are an emancipatory educator, you have to make a choice every day that you are going to stand against the oppression of children. You have to, and you have to say it to yourself. I don't care if you got to look yourself in the mirror, because I have a pledge for educators that they can recite if you need it. You have to tell yourself, I will uncompromisingly serve young people at the expense of all things, at all costs. If it costs me my job, I tell people all the time, I don't know how I became tenured. I don't know how. I broke every single rule. If they told me, Courtney, don't do this, I did it. If they said, this is the way we do things, I did the opposite. If they said, this is what you should be teaching, I taught something different, and I still followed the standards. But at the end of the day, I understood, look, I don't have time to become a part of the problem that almost took me out. Are you serious? I graduated from North High School in 2007. And when I left, I had a chip on my shoulder because I knew I barely made it out, because I felt that because of my zip code and the melanin in my skin, that my life chances were always on the line. And I hated that. And that hurt me deeply. So when I got the opportunity, when I decided I was going to do something about it and teach, when I got there, you got to know I wasn't there to play fair or to make friends. I was there to do what I didn't have done for me. And I understood that could cost me my job. To this day, right now, in any role I take on, I understand my job is always on the line. And I'm okay with that, because I know I'm on the right side of justice. I will never be without a job. And guess what? For those who believe that playing it safe is gonna really genuinely save you, it won't save you. And nobody's ever gonna talk about you over the dinner table. You're never gonna make any kind of headlines, and nobody is ever gonna really speak about you when you're no longer here. You have to do what's right, and you will be taken care of. Trust me when I tell you that. I was told from the beginning in my teacher program that if I didn't learn how to pipe down, I may never actually get a job. And that was the type of attitude that I received because of the pedagogy that I held. But those same people had to watch me be a finalist for Minnesota Teacher of the Year. So at the end of the day, it's just kind of like, what are you talking about? Nothing. You're talking about nothing. And I did it my way. So do it your way.
What am I supposed to say? My way. You remember those?
I cannot. Francis gets on my nerves with his song.
My way. No. I seagulls. Man, all right, my bad. Let me stop, because that's how our rooms used to be. Anyway, you know what's funny? When you, I had to. In that question, it's interesting because, and I honestly want to ask you to please repeat it, because I want to make sure I don't miss the parts as I wanted to make sure I was listening and then getting prepared. So I want to make sure I hear the question one more time.
Yep. I currently work in a school that is predominantly white, and some of the parent population is expressively uninviting of conversations about race and diversity. What suggestions do you have for educators who want to make space for these important conversations despite ruffling feathers?
Yeah. And I think, oh man, it's important now. Now y'all got me sitting up. So the thing is, I think, so let's make this real. So those when we talk about racism in schools, and we all saw the video about those fourth graders. Now imagine being in a school. So especially the teachers out there, if you've been in a school and students are telling you, this is what it feels like. This is what I'm hearing day in and day out. If you watch that video and you're shocked, I'm not. I heard it too. As a student, as a staff, I heard it from students. Come on now. So if and you have to ask yourself, what's your values? Let's be honest. If you say you want an inclusive school, and everyone wants to say they want equity and diversity, and yay, you want our bodies in your buildings, but you don't want to bring our traumas to the forefront of what's going on. Come on now. You gotta love all of us. You gotta bring all of our being in. And here, when people and students of color are saying, hey, something's going on, I don't feel welcomed here, I don't feel safe, I've been hearing these things in the hallways. That's why we do this work. So then you gotta ask yourself, which comfort do you want to sit in? The comfort of not having, or you're gonna be a peacemaker, and do something different? Or you're gonna be a peacekeeper and say, no, I just want to keep the peace. I don't want to make the parents mad. I don't want them in my email. You gotta decide.
That's
And so I think it's important to think, where do you want to be on it? What is it? And it's gonna take some real heart searching work. What's your values? Because you can't say you want things to be better and equal for all people, but then you're gonna be silent when people say stuff, or because it's gonna get uncomfortable. So you gotta ask yourself, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, thank you both. I know we're getting to, it's about 8:11 right now, and I know we're getting to the end of our time together. I feel like there are a few questions in here that are kind of answered by some of the things that you've just said, like helping colleagues move from the idea that students are using excuses to students going through experiences, again, using that same thing that you just mentioned, listening and really engaging on checking in with people, as someone said in the comments, instead of just checking up on them. And then a principal saying that some teachers are tired of dealing with anti-racism, education, and equity issues. What kinds of conversations should I be having with my principal? I have a feeling you kind of answered that in your last few questions, which is just being okay with being uncomfortable and being on the right side of justice. So let me just get to a few more, go back to one. Dr. Bell-Duncan, when you decide to actively engage students as teachers, how do you ensure that they're serious about this role and not seeking to mislead or cause harm in some way?
So, the thing about it is that they take it seriously because they're not used to having the mic passed to them. So when it's such an honor to them that they want to do everything in their power to represent themselves in the light that they want to be seen, but also to make you proud and make you know that your faith in them has not gone in vain. Mm-hmm. I have never, my scholars, because I saw another question that asked, what are some ways that this work and their teaching gets, shown to the public or published? My scholars have done phenomenal things. First and foremost, I'll just list a few things. They created a documentary about gentrification in North Minneapolis in 2015. They were talking about it before it was even really booming. And it started with just a conversation. What are y'all, a human geography conversation? What are you seeing in your local community? My scholars didn't know what the word gentrification was, but first of all, they knew what gentrification was. They just didn't know the term. My job as an educator was just to give them the vocabulary because they had the experience. So when they started talking about the changes in the neighborhood and how their family had been moved out to a suburban or rural area, or how all of a sudden they saw these new transportation plans coming into place, or things being built up, or high rises being developed in places where they previously hadn't been, they understood the changes geographically that were going on and also demographically. And so I just had to give them the vocabulary and give them the technical understanding. And from there, they took it and ran with it. I asked them, what do you want to do? Every time I asked them the question, now that you know what you know, now that you have the word to understand it and to understand what it exactly is that you're describing, what do you want to do about it? Every single time they told me, I want to tell everybody I know. I want to tell my community. I want to tell my parents. I want to tell my people because it's negatively impacting their lives. And they need to know because it can save their lives. It can change their lives. And so all I did was to set up the platform. Boom. They are naturals. I told my scholars every day, y'all are sociologists, y'all are historians, y'all are anthropologists, y'all are that by default. When you get to the University of Minnesota, like Chris, who by the way is majoring in history and global studies, you are going to blow those classes out the water because what people have to read in a textbook, you've lived it. You're the expert. And that's exactly what they don't play about it because it's their perspective. So they're not going to joke about it when they're talking from their soapbox. Second, they understand what it is to be miseducated. So anytime they have the chance to educate, they're going to do just that. And they're not going to play about the education of their peers because they know that they are in a communal boat together. And that when one of them makes it out, the others do too. And that's what type of community we fostered in our classroom. And that's the type of sacred community that is required of all educators to create so that your scholars recognize that they are teachers and that they literally have just as much as anybody else to contribute.
Yeah. Derek, I want to end with hearing from some student voices. What were some of the things that you heard from students in the days and weeks after the racist event at the school?
Yeah, it's interesting in that it actually pushed me to I wasn't into writing. I ended up sharing in a couple books that one that came out, Contemporary Case Studies, and another one coming out in April with a collective of school counselors that are doing anti-racist work. The stories, and I share about what I was hearing from our students of color. And one of the things they kept sharing was, and mind you, this is my second year there, and they kept sharing stories of the woodworks of, hey, guess what happened to me last year in this class? Guess what students said to me? And not only that, it's the trauma piece, so you have the trauma of them being like, man, I remember when I had this happen, but in the moment of the hurt of, you know what? I don't even feel like I can focus in class, or you know what? Can you just come down? Hey, can I just come down and meet with you and just talk? Or the other thing, I have to be honest, I remember some of my white students that I had built a relationship with had a mixture of feelings. Some would come in feeling guilt and shame, and we'd talk through it. And that for me was new as a school counselor. I was like, it was new territory, but I used listening. Because, and not only that, helping to empower the students, because they'd say, I wish I knew, what can I do? What can I say? I said, go listen to your students and friends of the other students of color here. But not only that, hearing from students who would even say, hey, Mr. Francis, how are you doing? You know how you feel with us? How are you feeling? That, oh man. And so the collective hurt that they knew was going on, they said, I know you're the only, one or two Black men here working. How are you feeling? What's it like for you in the staff lounge? And so being able to have those kind of conversations where they would share what the conversations were like at home, the parents were coming in saying, hey, how's this going on in our schools? They felt, parents were like, is it safe for my kid to be there? Those are the kind of things. And now as a parent too, I'm thinking, man, how would I would want my students, my child, to be able to feel like I can go get education, know that someone's going to speak up and call out when racism goes on in the building. There's a process going on. Just like if there's a fire in the building, I know they're going to respond. And so that's what I felt from the parents of, how can you not have a plan to respond? How can you not address the students and the feelings, the emotions, and process with them? That's what I really heard the most. And so I hope that educators out there start preparing and having proactive strategies for when these events happen.
Excellent. Well, I know we're over time, long overdue, but we just had such a great conversation going and such great questions from everyone. And you've heard it from those of you who are here listening. You've heard over and over from Courtney Bell-Duncan and Derek Francis of what you can do to move forward and to practice cultural responsive educating and to be there for your students. And so I want to thank both of them immensely. Like, I can't even tell you, this has been one of my, don't tell anybody else, but this has been one of my favorite Ed Talks. And I'm so grateful to you both for sharing your knowledge and your experiences. For those who are listening, please keep your eyes open for more info about our 2 upcoming spring Ed Talks events. They'll be coming out soon. We'll be sharing info on social media and on our website at achieveminneapolis.org/events. We'll be sharing tonight's recording as well, and some great resources suggested by our presenters in an email coming out this week, so watch your email for that. Thank you again to our generous funder, the Bush Foundation. They make Ed Talks possible. And if you'd like to connect with our event co-sponsors, Achieve Minneapolis and the Citizens League, check out their website information on the screen and find out how you can get connected and engaged with all the great work they're doing in our community. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Have a great night. Good night. Take care. Go forth and be on the right side of justice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.